Today is Thursday, January 22nd, 2004. This is the beginning of an interview with Mr. Nelson Hagar. Mr. Hagar is a veteran of World War II, during which he served in the U.S. Army Air Force and the U.S. Army from the period of July 1944 to October 1945. This interview is being conducted at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia. My name is Frederick Wallace. I am the interviewer. Mr. Hagar, as we have discussed, this is your story, and this is your opportunity to tell the American people just what you experienced during your time of service. I want you to begin by telling us when and where you were born, when you entered the service, why you entered the service, and then take us to your first duty station, which was boot camp or basic training, and then just take us step by step from that point on. This is your story. Mr. Hagar, will you begin, please?
Okay, I'm Nels, known as Nels Hagar, sometimes referred to as Hagar the Horrible in the comics. I lived in Westfield, New Jersey, and with the World War II, I was drafted in July of 1944. I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and in the processing was sent to Macon, Georgia, in the infantry, and went through basic training, completed that, and at that point I was told that I would qualify to take the exam for the Air Cadet, which I did and passed. I was then transferred directly from Macon to Miami Beach, and there I had basic training once again under the palm trees, and in completing that was sent to Madison, Wisconsin, to the air base. The purpose there was to put aside the Air Cadet because of my eyes not being such that I qualified. And I had had some training in Morse code, whatever, in high school or going in the service. And there was a special training program at Madison for radio operator and mechanics, and I took both. At that point, with the score that I had accomplished, I was designated to go to further training to become a high-speed radio operator. This was a position that there were very few of us in the Air Force, in fact in any of the services, and this required additional training, which was at Scott Air Base in Belleville, St. Louis area. And it was at that point that I received the high-speed radio operator training. And was completing this training when the Battle of the Bulge was going on in Europe. And all of the men who had been at one point in the infantry were then called back to the infantry to be sent after basic training to Europe and to be involved in the Battle of the Bulge. This involved my going back to Macon, Georgia, to the infantry through basic training once again. So this was my third basic training, and I had my fill of crawling on the ground under barbed wire, whatever. Completed that and was sent to the coast to board ship to be sent to Europe.
Can I ask, how did you feel at this point? You had been in the Air Force, had gone through technical training at Scott Air Base, and then taken out of technical training and sent back to the infantry. What were you thinking?
I was thinking that there were powers to be that knew better what was needed at that point to accomplish our goal, and that was to win the war. And since it involved possibly our having a major loss in the Battle of the Bulge, I felt that if that was needed, then that was to be, and I was ready to go. It was at that point that a command car arrived at Fort Meade, and I was approached by a colonel from the Air Force and was told to get in his command car and was driven to a train. And I said, "What's this all about?" And he said, "You're now back in the Air Force and you're being sent to Lincoln, Nebraska," which is what happened. And from there, I was sent to my assignment, the final assignment, to be in the 509th Composite Group, which was known as the First Atomic Bomb Group. We were at Wendover, Utah, and on the train from Lincoln to Wendover, the porter on the train said, "You're going to really like Wendover. There's a beautiful buxom blonde under every tree." And as I got off the train, I looked around for the trees, and there were none. We were in the salt flats, and there we were. The purpose and how this all seemed to come together was the powers to be knew that something maybe was available to either complete the war in the Pacific or certainly to make a big difference. And there was a lot going on that no one knew about, particularly in Chicago, where there was testing on the atomic fission. And it was initially a group of 800 people that were sent to Wendover as a nucleus for the group. And then when the decision was made based upon the explosion of atomic bomb to bring together all of the personnel who had been in special training, unbeknownst to anybody else, throughout the world. And not known by me, I was part of that training. And this was going on with individuals like myself throughout the world. At this point, a button was pushed in the Pentagon, and we were all brought together. And that became the beginning of the full 509th Composite Group.
And this was at the Wendover Air Force Base?
Yes,
in Utah.
this was about a 3-hour drive across the salt flats in Utah to Salt Lake City.
What was your impression of the base when you first arrived, other than not having a blonde under each tree?
The impression was we sure got something going on here that seems to be unusual. Wendover is right on the border of Nevada, and on the Nevada side is a gambling facility, casino, and on the Utah side was a restaurant and a gas station and a post office. That was the extent of Wendover. My understanding was about 300 people had lived in that area and were all related to the casino and the gambling. The first thing I saw was a sign that said, "What you see here, what you hear here, let it stay here." And that was an indication that we were to keep our mouth shut on anything that we saw or heard or participated in. Upon arrival, I was asked to go to the command center and had a meeting with Colonel Paul Tibbets, who was commander of the unit. There were 2 of us that were involved in that interview, Richard Nelson and myself. We both were radio operators. The question was asked, "What is your background?" And he was looking at all the papers that were before him. And he stopped everything and he said, "Corporal, I see that you're a high-speed radio operator. What does that mean?" And I said, "That means I take code with a typewriter." And he said, "Well, that makes my decision easy." And at that point, he turned to Richard Nelson and said, "You were going to be on my plane, and Corporal, you are going to be on the ground end of our missions, and you will be assigned to Island Command, or wherever we go." Though not having a typewriter on a 509th plane, a B-29, I was grounded. And from there, we spent approximately 8 months in putting together what was needed to perform a mission. And that mission, as time went on, it was very obvious that something special was going on. As an example of that, one of the times in Salt Lake City on a weekend pass, Richard Nelson and I were in a bar in Salt Lake City, and sitting next to us was a beautiful lady, and she struck up a conversation with Dick Nelson and was asking what's going on out there in Wendover. We've been told to answer that by saying that we were in training for air-sea rescue, and that was the answer that was given by Dick. The next day, back at Wendover and walking through the camp, came this lady. She was dressed in uniform. She was a colonel, and she approached Dick and said, "Young man, you did well." thank you for answering the way you did. That was one example of what we were all involved in. And we were very closely watched. We're constantly told that you see the sign and you do exactly what it says. And we are Air Sea Rescue. Along the way, and at a point where other decisions were being made in Washington by President Truman, who was in Potsdam for a meeting with world people, we were told to pack up and we were heading out. Part of us went by air, and part of us went by boat. I was in the group that went by boat, and we ended up going out of Seattle, one of 4 troop ships, and went to Hawaii. And at that point, the convoy was brought together. We had the experience of seeing Hawaii by being brought up to the dock. We were allowed to get off on the pier and watch the hula hula dancers. And at that point, the chaplain in the group was approached by one of the hula hula gals and said, "I'm going to show you how to do this." We all had a big kick out of that. And at that point, we went back on the ship. There were a number of young men who had cases of pineapple juice, and they were being sold like mad. Well, only to find out we got on the ship and looked at the carton that it said it was packed in the United States, not in Hawaii. The convoy left, was heading to the Mariana group. The announcement was made on the, now hear this, they needed a volunteer radio operator. And one thing you never do is volunteer in the service. I had my fill of sitting on the deck and playing cards with the guys. I volunteered, only to find that what it was that the radio operator for the ship had had a appendicitis attack. And there I was up on the bridge with the captain in the funnel, which is where the radio was located. And since in the convoy there were no lights, no communications going on, here I was in the funnel with a tarpaulin over the front. And at that point, the captain of the ship said, "Young man, you come out here and sit with me." And
When you say the funnel, what is that?
that's the funnel in the ship where the engine, all of the fumes go up into the air. So
Not
it was
pleasant
rather a
place
hot
to be.
spot,
I see. Mhm.
and it would have been rather interesting to be in there and baking, literally. Being up there, the captain kind of took me under his wing, and when we reached a point where he said, "Look up there, there's the Southern Cross." And that was the type of experience I was having with him as we went to the South Pacific. The people who were down back on the deck were wondering how in the world I was able to be up there with the captain. When the captain had his meals, I had my meal. And they were down there in the heat of where the meals were being served, and they got a lot of kidding about that. We finally arrived at Tinian in the Marianas. As we went ashore, first thing we saw was a Japanese submarine, a one-man submarine, which is a kamikaze type of thing. And that was our first sight of war. We went to an area where the CV...
Where was the submarine? Was it active? Or?
It was on the shore and had been beached.
Okay.
And I guess the person who was on there decided that he would do better not to get into the war and do his thing and to blow himself up. We ended up, make a long story short, it was a CB base on the island, which had Quonset huts, and we were sent to that. It was heavily guarded. You could not get in or out without going through a guard gate, and that became rather interesting, which is another side issue. And with that type of relationship on the island and being completely cut off, literally, from others, there were some hard feelings among the personnel in the other groups who daily were going and flying into Japan and risking their lives. We were kidded, literally, but I think it was some indication of how people were looking at us. They were wondering what we were all about. Our planes had an arrow in a circle on the tail. They were saying, well, I guess you needed an arrow to show you which way the plane should go. Things of this type. When the Enola Gay did take off, that was changed to an R. I guess the purpose of that being to offset any feeling the Japanese, through their intelligence, had that we were something else. We had made 4 missions into Japan for bombing. And it became very interesting to be there with that kind of feeling on the island.
Are you saying that your particular group had flown regular bombing missions over Japan, or other groups on the island?
That happened when, I'm sure, Colonel Tibbets was feeling the heat. I guess, and this is only my own judgment, that he decided that it would be helpful if our planes did take off on some missions, and that was accomplished. Actually, what was going on, our planes were taking off. They were doing their exercises to reach the point of elevation where, when the bomb was dropped, that it would have the proper height, the timing of the bomb not exploding on the ground but off the ground. That was a very delicate thing, and it had to be very precise. And that training was going on constantly, mission after mission, going nowhere except through this type of training. There was some talk on the island that they didn't know where we were going, where we went, and what was all about. I was assigned as a radio operator, as a decoy, along with Harry Penninger from St. Louis, to the Island Command radio station. We were the only two individuals in the group that actually were a part of the normal operation on the island. We were assigned to the radio station, the island command. We sat next to all of the other personnel on the island. We did the same thing they did. The weather, setting the time out, taking the bomb drop messages, handling air-sea rescue, which is a very important part of the operation. They could get a fix on a plane that was down, and the operator had locked his key, so we would have some ability to take a fix on the plane. So there we were, and we, instead of being in the Quonset huts, along with the rest of the group, we were in a tent and away from the main operation. So we were identified as being a part of the island operation, and we're accepted as such because we were doing everything that everybody else was doing. And that became very interesting. As a sidelight, there was a typhoon that hit Wendover. The Quonset huts were blown apart. Our tent, we merely folded down on top of us, and
Let me correct you, you were not on Wendover.
pardon me, Tinian.
Okay, good.
Tinian. The Quonset huts were torn apart, and there we were. We were the only people who had our housing. That was the tent. Then at a point, Harry, Penninger, and myself were asked to go to the chapel on the island.
What was this fellow's name?
Harry.
What was his
Penninger.
last name?
Penninger.
Penninger.
Right.
Okay.
We were to go to the chapel, which is in our complex. And there in the chapel were a number of people. That included the scientist who had developed the bomb and were part of a group and spent their time with us. The air crew on the plane, and the chaplain. The chaplain made a talk that we all will remember, and I have a book of our operation, and what he said to us is in that book, The 509th Composite, First Atomic Bomb. Basically, it was to the effect that something is going to change in the world, and hopefully it will lead to permanent peace in the world, not just now, but in the future. And at that point, we all dispersed. I went to the radio station. In the radio station, there were two radios that were set aside, and Harry Penninger and I were assigned to those radios. Those radios were set up to be the contact for the entire mission. We sat there for the entire mission and sent the weather out and sent the time out and waited for something to come through. And the first communication we had was from the weather planes who had preceded the Enola Gay, going to, I believe, 3 different possible bomb sites. That they were sending their weather at these locations, so Colonel Tippett could make a decision to go to the primary target or have to go otherwise. So we received those, and then sat in silence once again, and then a message came through, and it was in code. I have no idea the content of that. All I do know is that there was a general sitting at our back, and when the message came through, he personally took it and left. And we wondered what this was all about. At that point, we were then asked to leave the station and to go down to the airfield, and it was to be a special event. That involved General Spatz, I believe, who, when the plane returned, gave a special honor to Tibbets, and we were all there when the crew came out. Dick Nelson asked me, and I said, "Dick, what this is all about?" And he wouldn't say anything, and he didn't say anything for a number of days.
Was Dick Nelson one of the crew members?
He was the radio operator on the
board
plane.
the Enola Gay?
He was my contact, I was his contact.
Mhm.
He had seen the whole thing and was a part of it. At that point, the group were all honored by accommodation from the top brass. We found out that an atomic bomb had been dropped, and it was the beginning of something new in the world. And we all dispersed, went back to our enclosure where a special meal was served. That included some beer that had been flown in directly from St. Louis, Budweiser beer, the real stuff, and had been shipped out to us on our cargo plane unit. Composite group was made up of many different units. We were complete, and the purpose of the group was that if there was a need anywhere in the world, the group in one unit would be sent anywhere in the world to do its mission. It was complete, all the way from MPs to engineering, special engineering, ordnance, you name it. And that included the cargo plane. So we were self-contained. It was a new concept. It worked. It was held very secret. It accomplished a mission which did, in fact, change the world.
When you heard that the Enola Gay had returned from dropping the atomic bomb, what were your feelings?
When I returned to our enclosure, the scientists were there, and they asked that I come over and sit with them and have a meal, which I did. And I think we all were, how would you say it? We were in a limbo of not knowing how we felt. We really didn't know exactly what had happened. We didn't know the results of the event.
I see, okay.
But we did know that something had happened that was new and that we were part of it.
Was there a feeling of pride that you were part of this new thing that had happened?
Really not.
Mm-hmm.
Being a service person, and we all did our jobs, we were told what to do, and we did it. And my personal feeling was that I was part of something that would involve different feelings by different people. That occasionally comes up when people know that I'm part of the atomic age in the beginning. People seem, when they find this out in the conversation, they tend to shy away from getting involved in the conversation. I guess out of courtesy to me. The time now in this very critical point in the world where we are in dangerous times and we are at a point where we could destroy each other completely. That would most certainly include the atomic venture. We have no idea who has what, and it's scary. And my personal feeling is that our president at this point is handling it very well. He's not being trapped into making decisions by what others are saying and what polls are saying. He, I feel, is a very Christian individual. And my understanding is he prays every day. This is a time when we all need to pray that God knows what's going on. He knows the need of some changes and how this is handled by him, only he knows. It's a long response to your question. Pride is certainly not a part of war. And I certainly have no pride of being part of the 509th. I was a participant. And the memories that go along with that and the men and women that I spent time with in the 509 some very special people, highly trained, very, very dedicated individuals who have gone now through a life after the event. Some, including my friend Richard Nelson, who was the operator on the plane, who's now passed away recently. They've all become a part of what each one of us as individuals are feeling and praying and dreaming, hoping that some sense will be made, that some follow through on what was said by our chaplain preceding the flight, that hopefully this will lead to a final peace in the world and it will not be used otherwise. And if we're smart, we have any true feeling about humanity, this is the time to make peace. I feel at peace. I am very proud of my family. I have 3 children. I have 4 grandchildren and 1 great-grandson. They're all doing very well, and I'm very proud of them.
You were not married at the time you went into the service, were you?
I was not married. I came directly out of high school. I graduated and got on a bus and went to war.
How did you stay in contact with your family while you were on the island? Or did you stay in contact with your parents and brothers and sisters?
The contact was through letters, and they were constant. And my family, my folks, and my brother, a letter was sent to me every day. And boy, what support. I knew when they had the mail call that there would be a letter for me. And I have learned since that everything that we wrote in returning was heavily censored, again, for security purposes. The family is foundation of what this world is all about. They're all family, really. And we have generations. I'm in the 79-year-old generation. Something of what I have experienced has rolled off to the next generation, and we passed on and on and on. Hopefully we'll all still be here when that passing on is there to learn about what life is all about.
Did you have any opportunity for relaxation and entertainment on the island?
Yes.
And what form?
The part of our compound included a theater with a movie screen and with different layers like aisles were filled into the ground, and we would go there to watch a movie every night. I didn't have the opportunity very often to do that because I was at the radio station doing my thing. The fun part of all that for the people in the group, if you want to call it fun, sitting there and watching a movie, and at a point in time in the evening, a cloudburst would appear, and we all get drenched. And we all would cover our heads, and we let the rain stop, and then take the cover off our heads and enjoy the movie. There was very strong camaraderie among the people in the group. One experience that we had, and I mentioned this earlier, with the ability to get in and out of the compound through a guard gate. One of our members was from Manhattan, and he was a maverick, and he liked to go out and explore the island. And in one of his ventures down near the beach area was a Jeep, and he thought, well, gee, this is great. And he went over and found the key in the Jeep. He proceeded to get in the Jeep and take off. It turned out that the Jeep was the private property of a very high person in the Navy who was down on the beach with his girlfriend, a nurse. And he came back for his Jeep and no Jeep. The word went out to find the Jeep. And the whole island security is finding who in the world has taken the Admiral Jeep. Well, there was quite a chase going on, and Tinian makeup is like Manhattan, at Broadway and all the streets. So quite a chase went on, and finally our member decided to come to roost back in our compound, which he did. He went through the security gate with his Jeep, and following him were all of the MPs, and they were stopped. And they were not allowed to come in. And the question was asked, well, what's going on? Our Jeep has been kidnapped. It's gone, and we know where it is. It's in your compound, and we're coming in and going to retrieve it. Well, there was a lot of commotion going on in Island Command at this point. And my understanding was that Colonel Tibbets finally had said to people around the command table at Island Command, "Sir, what were you doing with the Jeep? Why were you down there exposing yourself to possible capture by the Japanese who were still on the island at the very end in caves? Is that a very smart thing to do? And are you married?" And at that point, the whole issue came to a screeching halt. But the Jeep was returned, and something was said, I'm sure, to the person who took the Jeep. But that was some of the experiences that we were having.
That was unusual. Did you have the opportunity to see any USO shows that were going throughout traveling throughout the Pacific?
There was some of that going on the island, and I never was part of that because I basically was spending the night at the station, and that's when the shows would take place. There was nothing in USO at our compound.
Did you experience any hostile action, hostile fire while on the island?
It wasn't hostile fire. Being at the Island Command radio station, and I was given instruction to send out the message to the planes who were either heading for Japan or coming back to tell them to return home. And that was quite an adventure. As soon as I did that, every radio operator on every plane locked his key in celebration. You could see them literally turning their plane around and heading home. And there were hundreds. On the island, they had the group to protect the island, and they had their anti-aircraft batteries, and they decided that they were going to celebrate. And with their tracer bullets, they took off in one big, huge bang. All this, and with our station being at the highest point on the island, all of these tracer bullets were coming directly over our station and exploding, and it was quite an experience. We were hoping that we survived the war and we would survive our own people and the anti-aircraft, but they were having a ball.
So although Japanese were still on the island, they were of no concern to you and to your
Yes,
group?
they were. They, when the island was invaded and taken back, it started on one end of the island, which was flat, and they were pushed. Japanese were pushed back to the far end of the island, which was cliffs and had caves. And what we did was to push them up, right up to that brink. Some of them jumped and were killed, and a lot of them proceeded to live in the caves. And it was very dangerous because they were still there, and every once in a while they would come out and they would shoot at the Jeep going down Broadway and kill somebody. And this was going on every day. So we were still at war. The Japanese were still there. And the story went around, I don't know whether it was true or not, that a nurse had been captured by them and taken back to their cave and was gang raped, and then was released. It was a horrible thing. I had a feeling at the time this actually hadn't happened, but it was a very direct warning to all of us. Do not get away from where you're supposed to be, because you may very well be shot or worse. And when that word went out about the young lady, everybody was on their honor, but the only place that we could go as far as an adventure was down to the beach, and that was patrol. And as the planes would take off, they would take off over our encampment. They would take off, and these are all the planes on Tinian. They would take off over a cemetery. The first thing that they would see was a flagpole with a United States flag flying. And they would go over then the cemetery. I just had tried to picture myself being in the plane and that being my first sight of, and last sight of Tinian, going and coming back. Part of the operation for the other planes was taking taking mines to put in the harbor in Japan. They were very, very heavy. Because of that weight, when they took off, they would reach the end of the island, and it was a very deep drop. And the air current, they suddenly lost their lift, and they would have to fight to keep from ditching, going in. Some of them did not make it, and there'd be a huge explosion. As far as explosion is concerned, the Noya Gay, when it took off, had the bomb. The decision was made not to arm the bomb before they took off. They were afraid that if something were to happen, it would blow the island to Kingdom Come. The bomb was there in the bomb bay and had to be armed, and that was done by one of the crew members. And you can imagine going into a bomb bay and arming a bomb, and it was very tricky. My understanding was that part of this arming process was done by a team of special ordnance. Each member of the team had one thing to do, and then he would leave the room, and another man would come in and do his thing. And finally the whole thing would be put together. But there were a number of people that were in this process. The purpose being for security, that no one person knew how to arm the bomb. It was all in a matter of steps.
We've got about 10 minutes left.
Okay.
Can you take us from the island back to your point of separation?
Yes, after the war was over, we returned to the States as a group, in 2 units as we'd gone over, one air echelon and the other by ship. We landed in Oakland, California. We were put from the ship on the dock. We were served, of all things, and you'd have to really understand this. We were served milk. boy, did we cherish that milk. And orange juice. And fried chicken. This all occurred right there at the dock area. We then were put on a train and were sent to Roswell, New Mexico. The adventure, you can picture this, of a very large group of men arriving in a town of Roswell, which is a very quiet, church-loving community, of having all these soldiers with one pass coming into Roswell and being their first experience, because we were not allowed to go anywhere when we landed. Our first exposure being back in the States was Roswell. We all headed to the local bar or to a shoe store where we would buy shoes. And at the bar, the line would be that you would get your drink and get back to the end of the line and just go around. The local newspaper took offense to this. And you can well imagine what the people in Roswell were feeling. That calmed down immediately after our first adventure into Roswell. But,
And was that where you were separated from the service at Roswell?
I was sent to Santa Ana, California, to be released from the service. Took a train from Roswell to Santa Ana, was discharged, and then took a train all the way across the United States to New Jersey. Didn't seem to make much sense going from halfway across the United States to the West Coast and then all the way back. Someone was picking up the tab for all of this.
That's the military for you, right?
That is the military for you.
Well, we're coming to the end of the cassette, and this has really been very, very interesting. You've had an interesting experience. I imagine when you got back to New Jersey, your family met you, or you went to your family.
Yes.
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 And then life started anew again.
They got married.
You got married, and did you return to school?
I just finished high school, and I was lucky enough to get into a special program by the Royal Insurance Company. It was a new venture for them of combining all the elements of the insurance industry into one venture. So we were 25 men who spent a year under the GI Bill in the headquarters of the Royal Insurance Company. Got training on everything in insurance, and then were sent out as management into service centers. I went to Kansas City, and it was the beginning of a new life. I was lucky enough to get into management right from the start, where others had taken years and years to get up to that point, coming up in different layers with the company and the growth.
And that was a direct result of you taking advantage of the GI Bill, was it?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Hagar. This has been very interesting, as I said.
Well, it's been nice visiting with you and those people who will be watching this over the years, and my family and others.
So you can tell your family that this information will be available at
Right.
the Library of Congress.
That is really a great thing.
We think it is, and that's why we enjoy doing this.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.